On Tuesday, the 19th of November, we marked 1,000 days since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Enormous suffering and widespread destruction are the result of this war of aggression. We see Russia continuously targeting, notably the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, including attacks on the substations linking the nuclear power plant to the electricity grid. The European Council condemns the persistent shelling by Russia of Ukraine's critical energy and civilian infrastructure. The European Union and its member states will intensify the assistance to Ukraine to ensure the resilience of its energy sector through the winter. We also see Russia continuing escalating its war, most recently with the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia. This is in addition to the military support that North Korea already provides to Russia through artillery shells, missiles and artillery. This represents an internationalization of the conflict. It is also a clear violation of international law and UN Security Council resolutions. The European Union and its member states will continue to help Ukraine and its people as Ukraine exercises its inherent right to self-defense. We help the Ukrainian state to maintain liquidity and thus function in the context of continuing Russian bombardments and hybrid attacks. We help Ukraine to maintain its exports through the solidarity lanes and to quickly repair its energy infrastructure. And our help extends to the Ukrainian people, both those remaining in the country and those who chose to seek temporary protection in the European Union. And finally, the European Union reaffirms our readiness to support Ukrainian people on their European path. Let me stress that the work of Member States and the European Union go hand in hand on all aspects of our support to Ukraine. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, the European Union has imposed massive and unprecedented sanctions against Russia. The European Union has also adopted sanctions against Belarus, Iran and North Korea in response to their support to Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Work on sanctions continues and also work on further solutions to avoid circumvention. Our efforts to sustain Ukraine will continue. Ukraine will remain at the top of our political agenda and our diplomatic action. Thank you very much for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Minister.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now for the Commission, Commissioner Reinders.
Thank you, Madam President, Minister, honourable members. It is imperative that we, as European Union, together with Member States, continue to use all the tools at our disposal to assist Ukraine, its military defence, its economy, its citizens, and support it on its EU accession path, in line with the EU-Ukraine joint security commitment signed in June. All aspects of our support are linked and interconnected. Security and defence goes hand in hand with support to accession-related reforms and with the support to recovery and reconstruction. And EU's accession is the ultimate guarantee that the European Union can offer. As shown by the Ukraine report under this year's enlargement package, Ukraine has continued to demonstrate remarkable resilience and strong commitment to fundamental reforms, despite the ongoing Russian war of aggression. The overall assistance to Ukraine and its people by the European Union and its member states amounts to about €124 billion. The Ukraine facility is delivering, with the total financing expected to be more than €16 billion by the end of the year, to support Ukraine's most pressing financing needs. Its second pillar, the Ukraine investment framework, will support investments in critical reconstruction projects. Around €45.5 billion have been mobilised in military support, of which €6.1 billion via the European Peace Facility. This helps providing a wide variety of arms necessary for Ukraine to repel the Russian aggression. The European Union is committed and delivered 1 million ammunition shells. At the same time, we ramped up the production capacity of our own industry. This improved production capacity will not only help long-term assistance to Ukraine, but also replenish our own stocks. By helping Ukraine, we are also building up our own security. Ukraine is now able to operate F-16 fighter jets, thanks to the Netherlands, Denmark and others. Additionally, we have mobilized 1.5 billion in windfall profits from frozen Russian assets. 90% of this first tranche will be channeled through the European Peace Facility to deliver priority equipment, including artillery ammunition and air defence, and for the first time, direct procurement from the Ukrainian defence industry. For the next tranche of expected 1.9 billion euro, we propose to allocate 1 billion to the Ukrainian industry. Our EU military assistance mission to Ukraine will hit the target of 75,000 Ukrainian soldiers trained by the end of the winter. However, we know that the current level of assistance remains insufficient to tilt the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine's favour. We know that Russia has put its entire economy on a wartime footing and counts on the military backing of North Korea and Iran, as well as the substantial support provided by China. We need to step up our assistance. Ukraine urgently needs more air defence, more ammunition and more long-range weapons. Our support to Ukraine must be scaled up. The European Union will continue to coordinate with its member states to increase our military support and to adapt our aid to Ukraine's needs. The European Union will also continue to work with member states to provide all the necessary political, military, financial assistance that Ukraine needs to win. It's very important to continue such a kind of support during the war now, but we need also, I will say, to continue to work on the fight against impunity, to be sure that it's possible to bring the responsible people for such a war of aggression to justice, and we need to continue to work to be sure that Russia will pay for the compensation of the damages caused by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So be sure that we want to continue our full support during the war, but we want also to continue our action about the accountability of the Russian authorities for all the crimes committed in Ukraine. Thank you very much for your support and your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We move on to the speakers, and for the EPP Group, Mr. Gahler.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. Once again, we need to deal with a brutal war of aggression, Russia against the Ukraine. Over 1,000 days this war has been going on. It might look like Putin can't take this any further because there's a lot of war crimes already against civilian facilities, but terrible videos online of the murder of Ukrainian political prisoners. There's hybrid war afoot. Chinese ship in the Baltic Sea was sunk, attacked the cables between Sweden and Lithuania. That has been ascertained that that's what's happened. We need to look into this further, but that's an area where we've fallen foul to this terrible war. In terms of taking the escalation further, we've seen 12,000 Korean soldiers invoked as cannon fodder. And this shows that Russia is weak. They need soldiers, they need munitions from East Asia in order to carry out their war of aggression. We need to be clear about relations with the future US administration, and it's good to see that Storm Shadow's attempts have been backed by Western countries. I'm sure that the CDU, FDP and the Greens, their announcement of feeding into a new coalition will be good, but in this backdrop, the war of aggression is terrible.
Spricht jetzt der Kollege.
For the S&D Group, Mr. Ruijten.
Vielen Dank. Ich glaube, wir haben es jetzt alle.
Thank you very much. We've heard your message. Mr. Ruijten has the floor.
President, Council, Commission. Some are apparently under the impression that Russia's war of aggression will end soon, and they act accordingly, going to completely irresponsible waiting mode. Wrong, and a gift for Putin. Nothing's changed really since the US elections in terms of what we have to do for Ukraine and for ourselves. Nevertheless, we see a completely absent sense of urgency in most capitals. And I also note here a striking difference between the Commission and the Council. Not surprising, because the government that you represent blocks crucial funding at this moment for Ukraine. What has changed is that North Korea sent soldiers and weapons to the front, and that Yemenis are being brought to Russia under false pretext. And as is often the case, the prospect of negotiations is intensifying the battle Russian gains and countless deliberate criminal attacks on cities and civilian infrastructure. Why are we letting this happen? Apart from the Baltic countries and 2 or 3 others, nothing extra is happening at this critical moment. Some of our member states, and you all know which ones, only did a fraction of what others did. Some still have modern air defense and MEPs needed in Ukraine. What are they thinking? Smartly saving some money? I don't want to find out what price Ukraine and Europe will pay for this inaction. We must ensure Ukraine has what it needs to defend itself, and using it without restrictions. Do more instead of less, and give Ukraine the strongest possible position on the battlefield and at any table, and deliver more aid in view of the winter that is coming. Europe must step up and ensure crucial conditions. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Peace must be fair, just and lasting, based on Ukraine's peace formula and international law. And we need solid security guarantees for Ukraine first, with NATO membership on the table. Thank you.
Dankeschön für die PF.
Thank you very much for the PFE Group. Mr. Garot has the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. The world is going through a period of extreme tension. The Russia-Ukraine conflict recalls the urgency of focusing on one objective, peace. We need to use all of our energy to achieve that. We have a president in the United States who's coming to the end of his mandate, and he is pushing the West towards escalation by allowing long-range missiles to be shot into Russian territory. And this is far from any peaceful solution. And he is preparing his people for a terrifying prospect of the conflict turning nuclear. And this affects the world, the immediate future of the whole planet. But the European Union cannot be heard and is dependent on US decisions. Like France, the foreign minister of France has said we should not set any red line in supporting Ukraine. We should not rule out French missiles being shot onto Russian territory or using Western troops on Russian soil. This is a serious error. We cannot follow a strategy which focuses on this war and which leads us to destruction. With these increasing problems, we only have one priority, and that is peace, a negotiated and firm peace which respects the sovereignty of nations. And we need to focus on the interests of people over everything else. Peace means that we must be heroic in our approach, and it needs a more heroic approach than in war. It means being loyal to the truth, and it means being fully aware. And this is Thomas Merton's proposal, and this proposal should be followed. We have seen so many lives lost already in this war. Those who refuse escalation want to see a long-lasting peace. Thank you.
Danke. Nächster Redner ist für die...
Thank you very much. For the ECR group, Mr. Coles.
Dear colleagues, in light of recent phone calls by the Western leaders to the Kremlin, let me be clear. Any hesitation, any delay in supporting Ukraine is not diplomacy. It is Chamberlain's appeasement. The ghost of Chamberlain haunts Europe today, convincing some that the concessions to the aggressor will bring peace. Are we so naive, so timid, that we would abandon Ukraine and its people to jackals? Yet, as the Ukrainian anthem declares, the glory and will of Ukraine have not yet perished. A coalition of the willing must rise above complacency, delivering every weapon Ukraine needs, every sanction against its enemies, and every frozen Russian asset has to be reposed to rebuild Russia, what Russia has destroyed. This House must ensure that accession process with Ukraine begins not as soon as possible, but immediately. History will not forgive appeasement, nor will it forget those who stand firm. Let us prove we are equal to the challenge. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Für die...
Thank you very much. For the Renew Group, Mr. Austervicius.
Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner, dear colleagues, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which has been going for more than 1,000 days, confirms Russia's turn to the path of increasingly open military confrontation with the West and its partners. Russia is expanding the circle of allies of the axis of evil, and in addition to the support it has received from Belarus, Iran, China and North Korea, has begun to make full use of North Korean military units. Notably, involvement of North Korean troops in aggression against Ukraine preceded increased tensions in Korean Peninsula. At this critical juncture, we must, first, continue to mobilize financial and military support for Ukraine without any restrictions on the use of arms. The fate of global future security, in Europe in particular and in the West in general, it is now being decided in Ukraine. Secondly, strengthen the global sanctions regime against Russia and its allies, including those who vigorously help invade sanctions. Violators must pay a high price now. Thirdly, we must provide Ukraine with security guarantees from the Western security organizations, thereby ensuring Ukraine's future membership of NATO. Security must be guaranteed. It is not given by chance. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Für die...
Thank you very much. For the Green Group, Mr. Søvndal.
Yes, sworn you, I'll speak in Danish. For 20 år siden stod jeg på en lignende...
20 years ago, I was at different rostrum to see that you can't tell the truth too often, because it's still true, and it doesn't make it more right just to repeat it. What we see in Ukraine are war crimes with no respect for human life. Part of the Ukrainian people have absolutely no rights in those areas occupied by Russian troops. What we witness in Ukraine is no less than a modern massacre. We need to be clear. Our union is a peace project, most of all. We want to protect against new wars on the European continent. But if you listen to Russian media, you get a quite different impression. The attack on Ukraine is described as protection against terrorism and denazification. That isn't just a white lie, it's a big lie. So we need to be on the side of truth. We need to tell the truth about our European values and the duty we have to stand for the international human rights and international law. We've taken a new turn in this war when Putin uses North Korean troops. He has crossed a red line he introduced when he first attacked 3 years ago. We need to decide as Europeans who we are and what way we want to go forward. On the side of truth, we need to stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. Because, as Kallas said during her hearing, Russia must lose its last imperialistic war, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they do. We have an aggression war on our continent, but I'm sure we can save them. Slava Ukraina, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much for the GUI group. Ms. Demirel.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, President. This war has reached a global scale. There are calls from Russia, from NATO. I have to say, seriously, this war has taken a global dimension. How can you explain that right from the start, NATO countries dragged out this war by delivering munitions? How do you explain that before the start of the war, Russia and the US were standing side by side, not with Ukraine? Colleagues, the global scale of this war has been present right from the start. The issue is whether we will push our way officially into a third world war. We need to be careful here. It's a very serious issue. What we need to do now is not escalate. What we need to do now is de-escalate. You've said that we need to stand alongside Ukraine. Yes, I stand in full solidarity with the people of Ukraine. But are you really? I'm asking you because according to surveys of people in Ukraine, they say the war needs to end now. We need to negotiate now. And that's why I'm asking you, because the men of Ukraine say that we don't want to fight in this war anymore. And no one is standing forward for this. Young men are being recruited from bars and from companies, sometimes with press gangs. Colleagues, is this true solidarity with the people of Ukraine? I doubt this. I have done from the start. Colleagues, if the Putin administration and the administration of NATO can't deal with this safely, then it's quite clear that over the next year there will be negotiations to stop this. And Zelenskyy is saying, why are you calling for more munitions? Why are you sending people onto the battlefields? That's not in the favour of people from Ukraine. This is a struggle of power between big, powerful countries. And this is to do with a new order of the world and reapportioning things. And that falls on the backs of people with your cries for war.
Nächster Redner ist für die ESN-Fraktion.
Thank you very much. Now for the ESN group, Mr. Bystrom.
Weitere Waffen an
President. So, more support for Ukraine. Who are you doing this for? We heard from a colleague, the majority of the Ukrainians want negotiations to reach peace and would give up territory. That is something that's come from a poll of Ukrainians currently. And 10 million Ukrainians have voted with their feet. They've left the country. Among them, 500,000 men of fighting age who didn't want to go that way, and a further 500,000 couldn't vote with their feet because they were dead. Is that not enough for you? Even Zelenskyy is now saying that he wants to move to negotiations and find a diplomatic solution. That's what we have been saying and demanding for 2 years. And you, all of you, who've demanded that, have accused us of being agents of Moscow, agents of Putin. And what now? Is Zelenskyy also an agent of Putin? Is he spreading Russian propaganda? Of course not. He's just noticed the war is over. Trump won the elections. More arms deliveries is over now. And you, in all seriousness, want to continue to fan the flames of this conflict and drive us into a third world war? so shortly before the end of the war. So that begs the question, which interests are you representing? Not those of the Ukrainian people. You're just representing the arms industry, NATO, and the war lobby, because there are a lot of people who feel that they are involved in this war against Russia, even though there's never been a vote about this. People in Ukraine don't want the war. People in Russia don't want this war. The Americans don't want this war. Most Europeans don't want this war. So just stop dragging us into a war. It is over. Thank you. Thank you very much. That brings to end the round of the groups. I'm going to be more strict with the speakers now as ever. The next speaker is Ms. Nerudova.
Dear colleagues, we are facing a dangerous partnership between two authoritarian regimes that threaten global stability. By supplying weapons as well as deploying thousands of soldiers to help Russia's war in Ukraine, North Korea is strengthening its military capacities. Increased bilateral financial and technical support will also boost its nuclear weapons program. Meanwhile, the people of North Korea are suffering terribly. While its leaders focus on war and weapons, millions in the country are struggling with hunger and oppression. North Korea was a potential threat for global security for years. Now it's becoming a reality. As defenders of democracy, we must act. We need a better sanction framework with real accountability and visions. Thank you.
Excuse me, colleague Nerudova, there is a blue card. Excuse me, there is a blue card from colleague Juan Fernando López Aguilar. Do you want to accept that? No? Oh, okay. It was for Catch the Eye. Okay. Okay. Sorry, that was a misunderstanding. Nächster Redner ist dann der Kollege Glucksmann.
Next speaker is Mr. Glucksmann.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Commissaire, chers collègues.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Council. The next week's going to define the future of our continent. We all want peace here, but peace is not giving in to tyrants who start wars or abandon those who are resisting. Since the victory of Trump in the US, we've heard resounding this music of renouncing and capitulation, even in this chamber this morning. You've just told us here on the extreme right of this chamber, but also the extreme left, you've just told us that at any price we have to avoid escalation. In a sort of waltz of capitulation that Die Linke and the ESN seem to want. Who would lose out on escalation? Well, we've seen Putin escalating, bringing in North Korean troops. You're saying sacrificing Donbass or the Crimea is not a massive price to pay, but you refuse obstinately to see that the goal of Putin is not Donbass or the Crimea, that was always and still is Ukraine and Europe. This territory will not bring peace. It will not stop war from coming to our shores. You're not going to oppose a tyrant by seducing him. You're just appetizing him for future hunger. So we're seeing the Russian war machine in train, and the question we need to look at is, are we doing enough? So let's look at these figures. The US have over 4,000 Abrams tanks. They've provided 60 to Ukraine. They have massive numbers of anti-air defense systems. They've only delivered 6 to Ukraine. Europe altogether has provided 3 times less munitions than North Korea. So are we actually facing the peril? Are we being commensurate with what is needed? In 2 months, a continent that does not pay, a president who does not pay any heed to our continent will take power. We need to move from unanimity. We need a coalition of those states of the willing who are prepared to support Ukraine more. And what we do in the nearest days and weeks will dictate the future of our continent.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Ferenc.
Tisztelt elnök asszony!
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, the war of aggression by Russia and Ukraine has shown just how vulnerable European peace is. There's a bigger risk than ever of the war being escalated. We need to avoid that situation, and we need to have a ceasefire, and we need peace negotiations. EU citizens across the continent are preparing for Christmas, and the fact that this is happening at this time of year is particularly important. But in Ukraine, we're seeing airstrikes and power cuts, and people are waiting for Christmas in those conditions. For too long, this war has been going on. Hundreds of thousands have lost their lives, and many have been injured. Millions have been left without homes, and these numbers go up every single day. And airstrikes have even reached areas that we thought were secure, such as western Ukraine, Transcarpathia, where several thousand people have fled the country. And the males in the Transcarpathian region, where there's a Hungarian minority, are also at risk. I listened last week to women from the Transcarpathian region about their experiences in the war, and they talk about the difficulties that we don't hear about too much here. What it is like being a woman without their husbands and partners in their everyday lives, having to do the jobs of men when the men are away and the women have been left behind. What it's like to dream about peace in a time when it seems so far away. I condemn the war of aggression by Russia, and I am very sad to see how many people are suffering in Ukraine, and we don't hear enough about their everyday suffering. Peace negotiations are important, and we need to support the ending of this war as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cavadania, please.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Our position, our international position and condemnation of the invasion of the war that has been very important to Europe for a long time. We need to stop this unfair aggression suffered by Ukrainian people. But any kind of dangerous escalation that might lead to war needs to be avoided. Escalation is no surprise that the flames have been fanned by certain countries, including North Korea, who have put boots on the ground. North Korea is a socialist dictatorship, according to the leader. Socialist dictatorship that sends out soldiers to the east of Europe. They're not only far from our ideas, but this makes you think of terrible stories from history, such as Soviet tanks rolling onto European soil. We need to make sure that we don't have socialist dictatorships in the future that want to take away the future from our forthcoming generations. For all of those people that were singing on the banks of the Buda, we need to stand firm for those who gave their lives in the Prague Spring. Ms. Veltmans, please.
Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. Today, Putin has more friends than before the war. Good friends. North Korean troops, Chinese technology, Iranian drones, and support from Turkey and India. And we're standing here unshod, talking about whether and how Ukraine might be able to use our weapons. And I know that in Sweden and Finland, people are being prepared for a broader war, an understandable strategy. They're very close to Russia. But you should know, colleagues, that all this doom-mongering about the Third World War is being spread by Russia with one goal in mind: to force Ukraine to give in. You know, their colleagues here also saying the same thing, talking about the threats of the Third World War. Well, that's being spread with a single goal, and that is to force Ukraine to submit. And that, colleagues, is the last thing that we should allow ourselves to do. We have to make sure that if there are negotiations tomorrow, Ukraine does it from a power of strength. There's a Flemish saying, Commissioner, that I'm sure you know. If you act from fear, then you will be beaten. And we shouldn't allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lagodinsky, please.
Colleagues, we have shared all of the arguments. We've had all of the appeals. It's now time to act. And we all know what that means. It means more support, more defense systems for Ukraine, and more missiles which save lives. Yes, that destroy lethal weapons from Russia and on Russian territory as well. This is in line with international law. And yes, we also need clear security guarantees for Ukraine that will survive the change of president in the White House. And we need to talk about that now. People here talk about peace, but my tip for you and to Ms. de Morel and Mr. Bissell, imagine, I know it's perhaps difficult for you, but imagine that you have to look into the eyes of Ukrainians, women who have lost their husbands, who are being raped, who are being bombed. Look into the eyes of those children who've lost their parents, eyes of men who in occupied areas are being tortured and raped men. We're talking about men raped in basements. Think about that when you talk about this, when you defend Putin. We are for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, for their future. And I hope that that will also be a clear policy for Trump as well, and that he will be able to look at Ukrainians in the eye and imagine that when he decides about their fate. We will be taking part in that decision, and we will always be on the side of Ukrainians, regardless of what here is mentioned and what comes from the left and the right here. Thank you.
Mr. Lagodinsky, there are 2 blue cards. Colleagues that have speaking time in the debate don't get a blue card. But there's another one. Yes, but if you've spoken in the debate, we can't carry on till midnight. There is one colleague that hasn't been on the speaking list. Mr. Zell would like to ask a question. Would you allow that?
Weil Sie in der Debatte Redezeit hatten.
Because you've got speaking time, as I have said.
Nummer 612, bitte.
Vielen Dank,
612.
Sie die Frage zulassen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lagodinsky, for allowing me this question. I remember the election campaign for the Bundestag in 2021 and the posters from the Greens, no weapons deliveries to conflict zones. And now you are saying that weapons should be delivered to Ukraine. That is a conflict zone. What about the demand that was placed in 2021 and why you're asking for something different now? I am not here to defend posters or explain them. I am here to outline what the reality of the situation is, and the reality is as I described. The reality is that we have an aggressor in Putin in Russia that has attacked a country. Our posters say that we want peace and a peace order, and this is being destroyed now. And in doing so, it's destroying women's rights, people's lives, and you will see that on our posters as well. And we will continue to stand for that military assistance for Ukraine and Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a general point, if you're on the speakers list, you won't get a blue card. So that's true. All colleagues are invited. Mr. Potenga, please.
Chers collègues, il y en a toujours.
Colleagues, there's some people talking about total victory, but in life what we're seeing is a complete failure of your policies. Against the opinions of military experts, you thought to provide arms to counter Russian aggression, to allow Ukraine to regain its total territory. But rather than liberating this territory, Ukraine is losing territory every day. it finds itself today in a position for negotiation today that's less favourable than 2022, when Russia could have been forced to withdraw from occupied territories since the start of the war. Your policies have cost Ukraine dearly, but also Europeans as well. Increase in heating costs, fuel costs, factories closing down and buying up arms. Everybody knows today we need to negotiate. That's not a question. Some people want to improve their position on the battlefield. The Russians are using North Korea, the Americans using intercontinental missiles, and the Russians are firing hypersonic missiles at Dnipro. So let us take a diplomatic initiative today. There's some who say, no, we should need to go further. We need to send European soldiers, French, British soldiers. Who are you prepared to send there? Your sons, your daughters, your children? No. It's the working class children who will be sent. You'll be happily warming yourself in front of the fire when they're fighting that war. So let's not wait until 2025. Why are we allowing people to die when we can stop this war now? Let's do it. Let's negotiate. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster.
Thank you. Mr. Neuhoff, please.
Sehr geehrte Frau
President, colleagues, the majority here in the EP has so far not understood the Ukraine conflict on a daily basis. It's ratcheting up as though we're falling foul to new Russian imperialism. This is a geostrategic conflict between two blocks of power. The US General Keith Kellogg had a public hearing in 2022, and in the minutes he said, if you can defeat an enemy without putting boots on the ground, then you have been extremely professional. Now, colleagues, although you may not want to agree, the EU strategy in the Ukraine conflict is a failure. Sanctions against Russia have not been bad for the Russian war effort, they've been bad for us. Western aid hasn't helped Ukraine, but it's led to further escalation and destruction. Despite this failure, the EU sticks to its guns. The diplomatic effort is to do with trying to overcome Russia. But this negotiation has gone wrong in terms of an escalation of commitment. This is to do with cognitive distortion. And this is a self-destructive course of events. With Donald Trump's election, we can see there a change of direction. And the path before Trump was elected was to change. Now, if you look at the long-range weapons, Russia has now shown that it is capable and willing to ratchet further and further up in terms of escalation. And the danger of an uncontrolled escalation has never been as big as it is now.
Danke. Nächster Redner ist
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. von der Schulenburg.
Ja, liebe Kollegen.
Colleagues, after almost 3 years of war, I think we should look at what the reality is. And wars here are a reality, but the outcomes of war are not very good. What Ukraine needs is not more weapons, but it needs an immediate ceasefire and negotiations. If the Ukrainians have lost the war, more weapons will not resolve this issue. And the Ukrainians are facing our military and political collapse, and we should do our utmost to prevent that. Based on experience, the last weeks of a war caused the most victims, and we need to prevent such a bloodbath. After almost 3 years of war, there have been hundreds of thousands of deaths, and large swathes of the country have been destroyed, and we need to make sure that this is stopped. Now, in a panic situation, we are now calling for long-range missiles to be used, such as Taurus. But this would lead to a spiral which would bring the war to Europe. And as a parliament, we should prevent this. The job of this parliament is peace and not war. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pascual de la Parte.
Buenos días, gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Well, we've seen an escalation in the Ukraine war with 15,000 North Koreans. This shows that Putin's strong. No? Yes? No, it shows that he's weak. He needs foreign mercenaries because he can't recruit enough soldiers amongst Russian youth. Now, if you look at the Chechens in Kadyrov, this has happened. Now they're using North Koreans, maybe Yemenis tomorrow. This shows that Russia's weak. Clearly, Putin thinks that given that the nuclear threat hasn't worked, he's using a different argument, which is turning the conflict international to try and dissuade Westerners from helping out with Ukraine. But this isn't working. We need to intensify our help politically, economically, and in all manners. Thank you, Mr. Magnetis.
Dear colleagues, the war in Ukraine has now gone beyond the 1,000 days. Putin has decided that it is the right of those who have power, who are above international law, and Putin has decided to impose his own law in Ukraine. He gets support from North Korea, and that reaffirms the need for us in Europe to help the Ukrainians defend their country. We must not forget that a victory of Putin will endanger the geopolitical security of Europe as a whole and will prepare other authoritarian leaders in southeastern Europe to imitate him. So it is our duty and it is in our interest to support Ukraine in this war, both with humanitarian assistance and with the appropriate military tools so that Ukraine can defend itself and after the end of the war that we will have the proper terms for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Steger.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need to ask a few people here if they actually have lost their good sense. Are you aware of what you're doing here? You are steering Europe into war. Is that really what you want? And Mr. Biden, who still seems to be president but not in control of his senses, is pushing for more war. His party has been rejected at the polls. His power is over, and yet he's allowing long-range missiles to be shot at Russia and provoking a third world war. No, you're not even criticizing it. You're not even asking for things to be de-escalated. And we're not hearing these demands from anywhere. No, from Ms. von der Leyen, from Borrell, Manfred Weber, all the way down to the President of the European Parliament. They want German Taurus rockets to be approved. What is your objective here? How far should this so-called unconditional solidarity go? Is this the alleged peace process of the European Union? Would you only be happy to move to peace negotiations then, or would you wait until bombs have fallen on European towns and cities? These moralists who don't know reality seem to not understand their own actions. Since the start of this outrageous war, there hasn't been a single peace initiative from the European Union. The European Union has led itself into a political dead end and is pushing towards war. And I'd like to say it very clearly here. This is not our war, and on no condition should it become our war, because it seems that some people here need reminding of that. The big economic loser in this war is us, because when Ukraine is being bombed, the cash tills are ringing in the US. And yet Europe is suffering because of exploding energy prices and industry on the brink of disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, we need an independent peace policy. It's high time for that, pushing for dialogue, negotiation and diplomacy rather than more and more dangerous weapons. It's high time that Europe takes its own interests into its own hands rather than those of the rest of the world.
Ich weise noch einmal darauf.
Thank you. Once again, we've got over 80 speakers on the list. So we can't accept blue cards for people who are on the speakers list. Mr. Juncken, please.
Shame on us. The justification for the EU is said to be, we are big on big issues and small on small issues. But in the biggest thing, the threat that is facing the entire European security, how small have we become? A whining mosquito. The Ukrainians are sacrificing themselves for Europe. They are fighting while we sleep. Ukrainian babies are being bombed in hospitals while we sing to ours. Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. Even North Koreans went to fight to Ukraine before our European troops. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, the imperial march will continue for as long as it takes. Glory to Ukraine and shame on Europe.
Okay, nächste Rednerin ist die Kollegin
Ms. Kavashova.
Yes, of course. Could you please give the mic to 100?
I really want to make a point of order because we're really debating here a very, very important topic. The rule of this parliament is that we can have a blue card. If people from the extreme right really putting the words of Putin forward here all the time, we should have the right to react. Now you say, yeah, I have, I don't know how many interventions. Yeah, that's why this parliament is elected for, to do interventions here. But it's also elected to have a debate. And what use it is that I'm sitting here all the day, hearing, and that I cannot react when people are putting forward the words of Putin. Then there is no use of this parliament. Let's have a real debate and let us have that interventions and the blue cards.
Dear colleague Woutmans, I'm usually totally on your side, but already in normal debates, we don't accept blue cards from speakers on the list, and now we have 80 speakers. So there is an exchange, there is someone from this side, there is someone from that side, not every individual, and then you can, I mean, we've already had like 5, I know it is, but we are in the European Parliament already. That we only have 1 minute speaking time for me is not a real debate, but we cannot change all of the rules according to, every individual who wants to speak this time. I completely understand what you're saying, but with 80 speakers on the list, if every one of you then also additionally takes blue cards, we will sit here really until midnight. I really apologize. I completely get your point, but we have a back and forth. We have a back and forth of opinions and of political positions, and I really apologize. It's the line of the Parliament in general, and in this debate all the more. I'm sorry. So now we have colleague Karvashova. Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really believe that we should respect the rules of this House, and I really believe that we shouldn't challenge the authority of the spokesperson. Yes, I am on your side with this matter, but it shouldn't be that you're shouting to the spokesperson of this House back and forth. I think she makes the rules, we follow them, and that's it. Not like a ping pong. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the word goes to Madam Karashova.
Thank you. I hope Hilda will like at least what I'm going to say. No. Tell me who your friends are, and I will tell you who you are. Russia asked North Korea, the regime under the most extensive UN sanctions, to join their war of aggression against Ukraine. And Kim Jong-un obliged, armed Russia, provided ammunition and even sent boots on the ground. These are clear efforts for peace. But let us also see the big picture here. This coalition of dictators poses a threat also to South Korea, our strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific and a crucial contributor to European defense capabilities. South Korea is a reliable member of international and rules-based community. It must become our key partner, not only in security and defense, but also in economy, including Ukraine's European future and its reconstruction. So let us also use this new reality and this discussion today to bring EU and South Korea relationship into a whole new level. It will also help Ukraine to win war. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin ist
Thank you. Ms. Gregorova.
Dear colleagues, this is what we call an escalation. Up to 10,000 soldiers from North Korea now support Russian forces. Russia has been amassing Iranian ballistic missiles. Putin revised his nuclear doctrine to lower the threshold for nuclear weapon use and immediately followed it up with deploying a hypersonic missile. This escalation has a clear goal: to tire us, to frustrate us, and to drag this for so long that we either give up on Ukraine or our citizens are manipulated by fear of further prolongation into voting forces sympathetic to Putin. We need to formulate a response. So I'm formulating. Yes, for a true peace, there needs to be a negotiation table. But what Putin is offering is a bombarded table with splinters all over the ground and Ukraine sitting on them. We can ensure a table with two equal chairs through the only thing Putin will respect: force. And Ukraine needs from us the means to use such a force. Are we clear? Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin ist
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Anderson.
Honourable Chair, around 3 weeks ago, I was sitting on a train from Kiev, going back over the border to Poland. We were visiting Ukraine with a delegation of representatives from different left parties, having meetings with NGOs, trade unionists, and the Ukrainian left organisation Socialny Ruch. Everyone in Ukraine was telling us the same thing. They expect this winter to be the hardest period since Putin started this war of aggression, with attacks on energy infrastructures, soldiers getting worn out, and relentless drone and missile attacks keeping people in constant alert. It is therefore of utmost importance that we stand firm in our solidarity with Ukraine. It is up to the Ukrainians to decide when the time is ready for possible negotiations. But for the possibility of a just and lasting peace, there must be enough pressure on Putin. That is why we need military support, and that is why we need to strengthen the sanctions regime. But Ukrainian society also needs other forms of support. There is a pressing need for social and non-profit housing models to address the housing crisis. Trade unions need to be strengthened so that collective bargaining and social dialogue can be continued as soon as possible. A strong civil society and transparency is needed in the fight against corruption. And Ukraine's sovereign debt also needs to be cancelled so that we can ensure the economic and political sovereignty of the country, in addition to its independence and territorial integrity.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Volgin.
Уважаеми колеги,
Dear colleagues, behind the scarecrow of some North Korean troops, nobody has ever seen them, the EU leaders turn a blind eye to the biggest threat, the threat of a third world war. It seems a reality because the US and its European vassals allowed Kyiv to use long-range missiles against Russia. And no, this will not help Ukraine. If the policy of fueling the war goes on, the only outcome will be a Russian response that will make a strike with the supersonic Oreshnik missile look like a festive fireworks. I understand that the outgoing US administration in Washington is furious because of its defeat in the elections. However, I do not understand why EU leaders are riding like the headless horseman to the abyss. They fail to see that all their actions prolong the war and push us towards a nuclear apocalypse. The demons ruling the EU will destroy it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Konechna.
Děkuji, paní předsedající.
Thank you very much. Dear Commissioner, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I have a question for you, only one question. How far do you think this escalation will go? What is the logical end of ramping up the so-called military help to Ukraine? After every escalation, on our part, Russian escalation follows. You provide more weapons, Russia invites soldiers from North Korea. You allow Ukraine to shoot into the Russian territory. Russia does the same. According to some sources, they've even used intercontinental ballistic missiles. What is the next step? Are you blind? Don't you see that you're bringing us to the brink of the nuclear warfare? Who are citizens for you? Are they just chess pieces? Wake up, this is no longer a chess game. This is about the lives of children, men and women. Stop playing with them only to bring Russia down. We are on the crossroads, either ceasefire or nuclear holocaust. At least once in life, move us forward in the right direction for once. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Kohut.
Sowieckie zbrodnie to okrutna I powtarzająca się historia. 80 lat temu Górny Śląsk, dziś
80 years ago, we saw what was going on in Silesia, and now Mata Rosa has deported and raped and assassinated thousands of people. This happened in Silesia, and this is going on now in Ukraine. Our tragedy has not come to an end. We can and must guarantee Europe's security. We need to stand firm as politicians and stop waiting for other people to act. We need to be aware that we're on unknown territory because there won't be Biden anymore on the other side of the Atlantic. We need to be brave and not cede to national egotism. We need to act while we still can.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Fritzon.
Thank you, Madam President. Ukraine's fight for freedom is also our fight for security and democracy. Here we stand today, and Russia's terrible war against Ukraine has gone on for more than 1,000 days. A new chapter of power is being written with this military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. We have to hold on and do everything we can to improve support for Ukraine, economically, militarily, and socially as well, for all those women and children who are suffering in this war. We Social Democrats will continue support for Ukraine because it also is a question of our future, our security for our children and our grandchildren, and our way of life here in Europe. And here in the EU, we shall stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with the Ukrainian people every day until this war is over. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Demeter. Thank you, Madam President. We agree on one thing. We condemn Russia's military aggression, and we must find a way of helping those people in difficulty. But we must speak about the economic repercussions as well, and the impact that unwavering support for war is having on European people's lives. We don't hear much about that, but we should hear about it because the situation is tragic. For a long time, Europe has been facing the spectre of economic stagnation. This year we face economic growth of 0.9%. We're hearing about factory closures and jobs being at risk. And one of the reasons for this is that Europe has cut itself off from cheap energy sources. energy sources which can now only be replaced at a much higher price. LNG imports have gone up, not just from the United States, but also from Russia. Exporters are doing well, but European businesses not so much. According to the Draghi report, companies are paying 2 to 3 times more for electricity than the USA. And skyrocketing energy prices have brought with them inflation at levels that we haven't seen for decades. Who's going to step up and take responsibility? And when the question arises as to how long the EU leadership will support this war, the answer is always as long as it takes, so at all costs. And it was President Biden that used this slogan a year ago. But since then, the Democrats lost the election, but most of the political groups here would like to continue that policy. Why? So I've spoken about economic repercussions, but there is something more important than that, or just as important, and that is protecting human lives. Long-range and ballistic missiles are being deployed, and the risk of serious escalation is higher than ever since the outbreak of the war. When the European Union was created, it promised many things, but 2 things for sure: peace and prosperity, and that is something that it is increasingly unable to deliver, and the majority of us here have a great responsibility for that. It's time to take the lives of people of Europe into consideration, not just the expectations of others. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Madison.
Chair, colleagues, dear representatives of the Commission and Council, in this Parliament, words are always more than deeds. There is much talk about the need to support Ukraine in its war against Russia for as long as it takes. But where are the deeds? The situation in Ukraine is getting worse every day because European aid is too scarce or comes too late. Germany, Europe's largest economy, supports Ukraine in words, but actual military aid has been limited to 5.2 billion euros. The European Union remains the largest importer of Russian gas, buying almost half of the gas exported from Russia. In October of this year alone, the EU paid Russia 1.8 billion euros for fossil fuels. If Europe wants to stop Russia, it needs to reduce its dependence on Russian energy and develop our own energy industry, abandoning the economically harmful Green Revolution. It is also necessary to increase military support for Ukraine many times over so that negotiations to end the war can take place from a position that suits us and Ukraine and not on Russia's term. We need deeds and now. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Brandstetter.
Grazie, signora Presidente. Oggi voglio cominciare in italiano con un messaggio.
I'll start in Italian with a message to President Meloni. And Ms. Meloni, there is a huge difference for you in any issue to do with politics, but in terms of Europe's security, you stand with us, not with those who think they're patriots. And I'll continue in German.
Patriotin.
Thank you. Now, when I heard that one of the patriots was speaking, I thought that it was a representative of the Russian government. It was a complete replica of Putin's propaganda. Now, if Yemenis arrive and kill, and that is not escalation. Now, if we look at Russian TV, they talk on a daily basis about genocide. They talk about Ukrainian culture not existing, talking about people that need to be killed. And nursery schools are being shot at intentionally. Killer Putin, we are not afraid of you. Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Sinkevicius.
Dear colleagues, first it was Crimea, then it was Luhansk and Donetsk, and now for 3 years, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And yet we still have Putin proxies here calling to force Ukraine into ceasefire, call Russia into ceasefire, force Russian imperialism into ceasefire. Now, with Iran, North Korea supporting Russia, even with the troops on the ground, there is a clear formation of evil, axis of evil. And when you ask a question, what is the logical end? I have an answer for you. The logical end is to destroy institutions like this, to destroy democracy, to destroy human rights, dignity, everything what we've been fighting for, everything what this world has built after the Second World War. This is the aim of Putin. And yet he's not going to stop in Kiev, in Vilnius. The Iskanders that are in Kaliningrad, they aimed at Berlin. Don't forget that.
Next.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Della Valle.
President, colleagues, we're all very concerned here because of the turn that the war is taking, waged by Putin, with North Koreans involved in the conflict with the Ukraine. We're also worried that Biden has authorized the use of long-range missiles onto Russian territory. Biden wasn't able to get through as president in the US, but can now decide that he wants to launch the Third World War in Europe. We have to hear from this war-waging majority. All they've done is make things worse in Europe. They've made things worse for workers and companies in the EU, sending thousands of Ukrainians to their death. They're now talking about defence, but that means austerity for European people and paying into arms lobbies. When will the Parliament hear a clear voice in terms of stopping this, de-escalating, and having a true peace conference with all players around the table? Every time that people say you can only reach peace defeating Russia, every time you say that, Putin's troops advance by kilometers on the front. And this is something that we saw with the European elections, now in Romania, and so on, moved to the right. The true sponsors of Putin are you, not the people you're accusing of. We need to open a space of dialogue and diplomacy and stop making the Europeans pay for this absurd war.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Ondruš.
Dámy a páni, moje vystúpenie je zložené výlučne z
Ladies and gentlemen, my speech only consists of the quotes from the liberal American daily newspaper New York Times. So let me quote. The first advance of Russia is a major change compared to the situation from previous year. According to a military expert of Blackbird in Finland, Russians have reached half of this year's territorial gains in the last 3 months. American military representatives claim that weapon supplies are not the main disadvantage of Ukraine, but the main shortfall is in manpower. It can be perceived as defeatism, but it is realism. It is correct to call this a proxy war because Biden's administration supported it, also because the war was a chance to weaken our enemy. The US have set a path. They supported the war to continue, but never enough to win, to make Ukrainians win. Russia and the USA abuse internal division of Ukraine for undermining and abusing this situation, especially to the detriment of Ukrainians. These are quotes from American media.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Toveri.
Madam President, dear colleagues, Russia's illegal and brutal attack on Ukraine has now continued almost 8+3 years, and it has and will continue as long as we accept and allow it to happen. We have constrained our actions against Russia's economy and our support to Ukraine because we have been afraid of escalation of the war. And now Russia has bought not only North Korean artillery and ammunition and ballistic missiles to Europe, he has brought also North Korean military forces to Europe. An Asian nation is now participating in the Ukrainian war. Putin has escalated this war to a world war. And remember, he started it, not we. We don't have any excuses anymore. Therefore, we need to punish Russia with proper sanctions and support Ukraine more than Ukraine, so that Ukraine can have peace on its own terms, not on Putin's terms. If we don't do it and instead feed the dictator, we will have a new war in Europe in a few years. And yes, that time it would be our children fighting the war. To my colleagues in the left and right, I have 3 children and they are all in the Finnish Defence Forces reserves. Even though they are ready, I don't want them to go to war. The best way to prevent this is to stop Russia now by forcing Putin to negotiate in Ukraine's terms. Putin won't be stopped with diplomacy. He will be stopped by force. Trust me, we Finns know Russians better than most of the Europeans. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Schön. Nächster Redner ist...
Thank you. The next speaker.
Nächster Redner ist der Kollege.
The next speaker is Mr. Luena.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, here, fundamentally, this is a debate for and on freedom of democratic societies, and here, Ukraine, an independent country which was invaded by orders from outside. But we've heard speakers here from the extremes of this House, and they say that the war needs to end, no matter what. Well, this is what you need to ask Putin to do. He's the only person who is guilty here. He's the only one. If we abandon Ukraine, then we will be deceiving ourselves. We need to provide assistance, military equipment, weapons, and we also need to impose sanctions. We need to support Ukrainian society. If we abandon them, we will deceive ourselves as a project of freedom, which is what we are. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Vistisen.
It is very interesting to hear this debate when you look at the sheer level of hypocrisy that is shown in this room. Because if you really believe that Russia is an existential threat to Europe, why aren't your governments doing anything about it? My country of Denmark is now the second largest EU donor for Ukraine. More than 60 billion Danish crowns have now been spent from the Danish taxpayers. But let's look at Europe's grand economies. Denmark have given 1.9% of GDP to Ukraine. Germany have given 0.38%. France have given 0.17%. Italy has given 0.12%. And the great socialist government of Spain have given 0.09% of their GDP to Ukraine. So who are you really think you are fooling in this House? If you really are serious on Ukraine, go back to your capitals, go back to your governments and find some cash for Ukraine instead of blabbering on in this House. Og til de danske tilhørere til den her debat må man bare sige, at når...
And to Danish listeners to this debate, when incoming President Trump says that there will be peace negotiations, the choice we have in Europe is that we can help shape these peace negotiations. We shouldn't just deny facts, because there is large Danish support, but that will not be able to fill the gap that the Americans leave us behind. And the Germans have said that they might cut their support by 50% next year. We're home alone, but unfortunately, children are in government in Europe. So we need to have serious peace negotiations that won't just be capitulation to root Putin, but we need to be a big and strong nation with real security guarantees. We'll need to make Ukraine that so Russia won't attack again.
Kollege van Overveld.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Van Overveld.
Voorzitter, collega's.
President, ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, the Russian invasion is not just threatening the sovereignty of Ukraine, but also the foundations of our European values. Moreover, the interaction and cooperation between North Korea and Russia constitutes the beginning of China in this conflict. What we need to do is clear. We need to build military capacity, and here I mean mass production. That is of essential importance. In order to develop this, there are 3 levers that need to be pushed. First of all, we need to see more shift in the European budget. Secondly, more right of initiative for the European Investment Bank, and third, coordinated actions at the level of member states. Through supporting Ukraine, we're not just supporting their freedom, but also the freedom of all of us. That responsibility is not something that we should underestimate, nor try and escape. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Next.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Barner.
Thank you, Madam President. Continuăm să ne aflăm.
It's been over 1,000 days since we've been at this crossroads. Ukraine is burning because of the ambition and the hunger of a dictator and a tyrant. North Korean troops are now in Ukraine. Their presence is a scary reminder that this conflict is extending. Russia is sending ballistic missiles, destroying families, cities, and making a mockery of international law. This is not some conflict in history books or in movies. This is a fire that is a few hundred miles away from our borders. Every Ukrainian that dies fighting, every child that hides in fear, every house that is destroyed is a record of our shame. We have to rise to this challenge. We have to strengthen the support for Ukraine with a wave of solidarity. We need more weapons. We need more humanitarian aid and economic assistance. Everything that is necessary in order to stop this inferno, this hell. We have to show the world the true power of the European spirit, not just become followers of Putin's rhetoric.
Neumann.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Neumann.
"12,000 North Korean soldiers are fighting for Russia, sent in exchange for advanced military technology, gaining battlefield experience they might use against South Korea. Russia is buying Shahed drones and missiles from Iran, providing Su-35 fighter jets and support to Iran's nuclear program in return, directly threatening Israel and global security. Russia is recruiting soldiers in Yemen in exchange for weapons the Houthis will use to intensify their attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. We've seen bombs smuggled in planes, internet cables destroyed in the Baltic, cyber attacks on government systems across Europe, and a dissident assassinated in the middle of Berlin. Putin has trampled every red line of international law, and we are witnessing a growing alliance among regimes thriving on repression, destruction, and death. If we, dear colleagues, want diplomacy, demilitarization and trust building to prevail, we must ensure this alliance does not win this war against Ukraine, nor this war against freedom, also fought on European soil. Slava Ukraini, Baroje Azadi.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Klaus.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Clausen.
For 14 dage siden
2 weeks ago, I was in Warsaw for a meeting with Baltic socialists, Scandinavian socialists. I met a Ukrainian soldier on leave, and his message was clear. Do not leave Ukraine to Trump and make Ukraine accept an unfair peace, because that won't create a sustainable peace. He said Ukraine needs weapons, which is why we need to focus on what we do. We cannot export the weapons Ukraine needs to other parts of the world, where they either do not need them as much or use them wrongly. We need to make the sanctions against Russia efficient, because Russia's ability to continue the war is that they can still sell products to us. They're still able to smuggle oil out of Russia. We need to stop the shadow fleet Russia has. We need to make sure that that happens. And then we need to support Ukrainian reconstruction already now. Build up the welfare system, infrastructure, and secure workers' rights. It's really important. I'm already part of an association and make sure that Ukraine has its energy structure. That's what I worked on before I became a member of this parliament. Anders Vestisen from Denmark is right on one point. We do not support Ukraine enough. We should do much more in the future.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Borgalho.
President, colleagues, em 2022, quando as tropas russas
In 2022, when Russian troops invaded Ukraine, Europe was surprised. But the annexation of Crimea and the humanitarian attacks against humanity, we have seen an attempt to kill members of the opposition as well, training of military forces. Europe was surprised despite 8 years of warning. 10 years after the annexation of Crimea, we are surprised by the involvement of North Korean troops in this conflict. And colleagues, it's high time for Europe to not be a continent which is surprised by the real world. We need to be realistic and ready for this world of uncertainty. The question is not the cost of winning the war. It's about how much it will cost us to lose the war.
Those that I guard, I do not love. Without fighting back, there will be nothing left to guard. Muito obrigado.
Excuse me, we have a blue card by Mr. Oliveira. Would you accept that?
Yes, I do.
Please.
Mr. Oliveira.
Sr. Deputado, a humanidade está hoje perante o risco real.
Thank you very much. There's a real risk of confrontation between nuclear powers and an escalation. That's what the situation is now. You finished your speech with a call to increase this escalation towards war. What will be the repercussions of this policy? Just how far do you want to go? What kind of repercussions will there be for future generations if we do not prioritize peace? We could see an escalation which is dangerous, especially if we take into consideration the involvement of nuclear powers. Thank you.
Sr. Deputado, com todo o respeito.
Thank you. With all of the respect, with all due respect, the only discourse which leads to escalation is one which puts the responsibility on the invaded country and not the invading country. It's a democratically elected regime that has been accused of pursuing certain policies. We need to be in favor of Ukrainian peace. That means being in favor of the end of the war, and Ukrainian lives are suffering on a daily basis. Thank you for your question. That was my response.
Thank you. Mr. Assis is the next speaker.
Senhora Presidente, Sr. Comissário, caras e caros.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the deployment of North Korean troops in Ukraine has shown that the Russian dictator really is planning a war against the West. Not the West that the extreme right here is talking about. We're talking about the West of representative democracy, the values of pluralism. It's not just a question of the military message. It's also a message that Putin is sending by deploying North Korean troops. And that is that we're talking about a dispute between Russia and Europe and the West. But Russia has a European aspect to it as well. But by using North Korean troops, Russia is bringing the North Korean leader into the aggressor states, but at the same time provoking Europe. And obviously the North Korean regime is inimical to the West too. And this provides a further reason why we need to resolutely continue in supporting the war against the Russian invader.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Buenos días.
Thank you very much. Good morning. When the invasion took place, which wasn't going to happen, why did Putin dare to invade Ukraine? Putin entered Ukraine because he knew that Europe was weak and that Europe had been laughing at Trump for 6 years when Trump was talking about the threats linked to dependence on Russian gas for Europe. And all the adversaries were laughing. And here people boasted about investing in the Green Deal and huge amounts of money spent on absurd things that no one needs apart from you, but means that Europe is completely vulnerable. And then it was Mr. Biden, President Biden, Democratic administration that accepted it was the Democratic administration that accepted the annexation of Crimea. And then look at what happened here with the Social Democrats and the German CDU, which has been on a permanent honeymoon with Putin until 4 days ago. 20 years of honeymoon, emptying Europe, closing nuclear power stations, imposing an energy policy and silly energy policy which has made us weak. And then here in Europe, weapons haven't been given. Some people are saying we need to give Ukraine to Putin because he's threatening us with a third world war. No, our sovereignties need to continue to be sacred, but the European strategy and Biden's strategy have failed. We need a new strategy, and that will need to come with President Trump. And you're all very nervous, but President Trump is the one who has brought solutions for many things, and he's going to do it for this war as well. Thank you.
The next speaker is Aurelius Veriga.
Pirmininkė, kolegos.
Chairman, colleague, Russia had plans to occupy Ukraine in a few days, but now it tries to persuade its people that they have to fight for their country and continue to murder Ukrainians. The regime is supported by North Korean soldiers, and we can only guess what kind of repressions will be applied to Korean soldiers if they do not go to Russia to kill Ukrainians. When talking about escalation, Russia tries at its best to escalate. The process usually threatens with nuclear threats and bombs civil populations. Ukrainian losses are also due to democratic countries not being able to provide the necessary support to Ukraine when it had advantage in the front. Now Ukraine needs even more help without any limitations.
The next speaker is Michal Kobosko.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Komisarzu, drodzy
President, Commissioner, colleagues, Europe is facing an existential challenge. Military cooperation between Russia and North Korea is a true alert. These are two regimes that threaten world peace, and Russia wants to drag other countries into this war. The new nuclear doctrine from Putin is an attempt to intimidate. In terms of Ukraine, this isn't something we can permit. We need much more than words. We need action. Enhanced sanctions for Russia. We need to use we need to take all frozen assets from Russia to support Ukraine and to strengthen our military efforts. That's essential. What's happening in Ukraine at the moment will define our future for generations to come. Supporting Ukraine, we support freedom and democracy, and everything that Putin represents, we're fighting against.
President, a few minutes ago, Sergei Lagodinsky used clear words to show how women and children and men are being abused and dying. Our support must not be shaken. 12,000 North Korean troops being deployed in the Kursk region is proof of joint action between Pyongyang and Moscow. And Trump is having a discussion with Putin and excluding Europe from being at the table for negotiations. The voice of Europe at those negotiations is silent. This is dangerous for Europe because it's dangerous for our security, but also for global stability. Europe must be present, must show resolution. We cannot stand indifferent while our values of freedom and democracy are being trampled underfoot. We must show respect to the resistance of the Ukrainian people.
Chers collègues,
Colleagues, either we go to war or you don't. The Ukrainians are doing so, the Europeans are not. We promise and we sign resolutions. Condemning the presence of North Korean soldiers is not taking action. So what do? We are allowing the war to continue without giving the Ukrainians the means to win because we are incapable of giving more. Let's be serious and stop making dangerous promises. The only question is, are we ready to go to war? I tell you, militarily, we're not ready. As a soldier, I believe that we need to review our strategy and build our defense on reality and not words. But what reality? The arrival of Trump will lead to a halt in the fighting. At that point, we will have to be able to act and show our determination in the face of the Russians by deploying troops on Ukrainian soil. That will not be enough. We need to speed up our rearmament. It's our lack of credibility that led Putin to attack Ukraine. Only a real European defence pillar, independent of foreign powers and respectful of sovereignty, will enable us to act as a deterrent, able to defend ourselves and the countries that ask us to do so. Thank you.
Speaker is Lucia Annunziata for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. This is questa è la terza volta che...
This is the third time we're voting on Ukraine since the start of this Parliament. Last time was the 19th of October. Following a divisive discussion, the text was approved with the addition of a request for active participation from Europe for a peace initiative, which would soon lead to an international summit. In the current version, all of that has disappeared. In this new version, there is no reference to that role for Europe, and there is just the promise of further military and economic action in favour of Ukraine, which we fully agree with, alongside a project for defence and military intervention from Europe. I agree too. But the issue is promising military defence and development. We know how long this all goes on for. That is just a losing idea. Just 1 moment, please. We're in this situation.
Time is over. You had 1 minute, please. Now the next speaker is, please, you had just 1 minute. Mrs. Annunziata. The next speaker is Renis Poznaks, please.
Labdien.
Hello, Madam President. I would like to repeat, Ukraine is the only nation which has chosen its way towards union, by fighting and by their lives, not by signing papers. And this has happened since 2014. And no one wants to be in a Europe where somebody else will point out to you how much of your territory you'll have to give away in order to achieve a false peace and cheap gas. I want to live in Europe where the freedom of one country is the freedom of all countries. Unfortunately, democracy is slow, dictatorships are fast, they can supply militaries and equipment. We have to be more resolute, otherwise we'll use our democracy in a democratic way, which we can see in the last elections. Thank you.
Is Figueiredo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Commissioner, the war in Ukraine is not for land or borders. It is a war for the soul of Europe and its values. A Europe where freedom is defended and democracy triumphs over tyranny. A Europe where aggression is met not with hesitation, but with resolve. We must continue to support Ukraine whatever it takes. And whatever it takes means more weapons, air defense systems, ammunition, long-range weapons, and the permission to use them. It also means more effective sanctions and continued diplomatic support, because Ukraine's fight is our fight, and a victory for Putin or Kim Jong-un would be a defeat for us all. Too often we have hesitated and delayed. How many lives and how much suffering would have been saved if we had acted quicker? I don't know about the Hungarian presidency, but this Parliament is clear. We will not hesitate, we will not tire, we will not let democracy yield to tyranny.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Reinier van Landschot.
Nuclear threats, assassinations, firebombed airplanes, sabotaged factories, destroyed internet cables. Every day we read about Russia's terrorist attacks on Europe. But like ostriches, European governments and some people in this parliament stick their heads in the sand in the hope that maybe the danger will pass. But while these attacks scare us, Putin is terrified. His war economy collapses and he begs Kim Jong-un for soldiers. But he trembles even more at the thought of a well-functioning democracy right at his doorstep. And meanwhile, Trump might force Ukraine to surrender. Between now and January 20th, when he comes to power, we have 55 days to step up our game. European governments, ostriches, pull your heads out of the sand, move fast, create a coalition of the willing, and put Ukraine in the best possible position for a just and lasting peace. Seize all Russian assets, directly invest into Ukraine's mass weapon production, and protect Ukraine on the way to NATO and EU membership. Thank you.
Much. The next speaker is Eliana Zovko.
Right, Madam President, dear colleagues, Russia told that its aggression on Ukraine would last 3 days and that next to giant Russian bear, little Ukraine would fall quietly. We are entering the third year of this David versus Goliath fight, where the biggest winner is at the moment the Russian highly paid propaganda. The tools communists used for decades to distort the truth. Estimates are that Russia invested $1 billion into propaganda war. The fact that North Korea is sending its soldiers to fight against brave Ukrainians proves that we have not finished with totalitarian values and ideology where like-minded dictators unite their forces in order to preserve the autocratic regimes. And Iran is also joining its effort with the autocratic bloc by chipping in with their drones. You have clear company of thugs on one side. It is up to you to take part in history making. This is a clear signal for the democratic world. Ukraine must not be left alone as unfinished business, and we have to stand with them as long as it takes, as we have promised. Don't get tired fighting against oppression. History will reward you as it did with little David.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Vilija Blinkevičiūtė.
Gerbiama pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos.
Mrs. Chair, Commissioner, colleagues, it soon will be 3 years since Russian invasion into Ukraine, and it seems that the Kremlin regime has no intention of stopping. Russia's cooperation with North Korea shows that a very dangerous axis of evil is forming, which has no respect for international law and peace. The presence of North Korean troops on the European continent is a very dangerous development, which is escalating the war and showing that our security is not just a regional issue, it is now becoming a global issue. And it's just a case in point that we have no other choice but to increase our military support to Ukraine and help it defend itself. We have to prevent the circumvention of sanctions and isolate Russia's ability to import the parts it uses to manufacture weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no way of going back. European support alone will not be enough. We have to also mobilize our international partners. Thank you.
Režim v KLD. The North Korean regime seems like a curiosity with bizarre leaders at its head. In fact, it is the most cruel totalitarian regime where human lives have no value. Everything is focused on waging a war with South Korea, Japan, US, Europe, the whole democratic world. Putin's Russia have dropped so low that it accepts military help from this horrendous regime, which only gets more experience and whose dictator is ready to cast an attack. Russia doesn't care about anything, about the lives of its citizens, about the safety and security in the world. It doesn't want peace. It doesn't want negotiation. That's why we need to stand with Ukraine. No doubt about our support. We need to help Ukraine to defend itself and defend ourselves.
Ivars Ijaps.
Madam President, Russian aggression in Ukraine seems to many as a regional conflict that only those who are close to it should be afraid. But I think the North Korean soldiers in Ukraine shows that this is an attack on the whole free world, like the aggression of Iran against Israel. The red lines serve our economy, thriftiness and fear. So irrespective of what American administration does, we have to support Ukraine. We should allow them to use the weapons in any way because their fight is our fight. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Unfortunately, the situation of the Ukrainian army in Kursk is not good. We've seen North Korean troops also arrive there, and the use of what Putin's doing shows he doesn't want to stop this war. What he wants to do is intimidate us, and he also wants to have a position in potential peace negotiations. We need to support Ukraine with weapons and funding. It's not the time to take decisions to abandon Ukraine. The new administration in America with Trump needs to see our clear position in favor of Ukraine. It needs to be based in norms and institutions which were created by the US and Europe after the Second World War. Washington is very concerned with China, and China are paying a great deal of attention to what's happening in Ukraine. This is not just a European conflict. It has significant impact beyond that, and we need to be up to this challenge.
Pizzula.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During 1,000 days of war, 122 billion euros available for assistance, and finally 1 million artillery shells delivered. European perspective, step by step, became a reality. As Europeans, we can be proud of our actions, but we must continue. On the other side, direct involvement of North Korea and the new nuclear doctrine, warmongering and war crimes. More support to Ukraine and stronger sanctions for all direct and indirect enablers of Russian aggressions are needed. Our transatlantic allies voted for a change that is difficult to predict, but we cannot get over-prepared for reaction to any way their action may take. If NATO will no longer be enough, European needs to step up. If rules and values became transactional tools, we must oppose it. While Ukraine fights for our security, Europe must lead the fight for the rule-based international order, as long as it takes.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Billy Kelleher. Oh, sorry, Michal Dworczyk. Sorry.
Pani Przewodnicząca, koleżanki i koledzy.
President, colleagues, on Wednesday when there was a big attack in Kiev from Russia, and that is one where citizens were attacked. The time between attacks is decreasing. There are thousands of North Korean soldiers as well. Looking at what's happening in Donetsk and Zaporozhye as well is terrible. Our partners often say that help from the West is not enough to stop Putin. So we need to strengthen sanctions against those who are aiding Russia, North Korea. We need to exert pressure on China. Because they lead the continent, they need to get out of the war. Ukraine needs help for peace, not at all costs, but fairly.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was not just about some regional conflict. It was about crushing an entire nation whose hopes and aspirations were to join the European Union, to embrace Western values and democracy. And this House has been supportive. But not every political grouping in this House has been supportive of Ukraine. And we saw more recently the shameful conduct of Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, in being friendly with a dictator like Putin. And it is appalling in this day and age that this particular home of democracy in the European Parliament can't even come together in unanimity around the issue of sanctions on Putin and on Russia. We have to ensure that we bring the Russian capabilities to its knees through sanctions and obviously in the area of military as well. Reference has been made to the fact that two nuclear wars are at war. Yes, they are. North Korea and Russia are at war, and are at war against a peaceful people in Ukraine as we speak. Some of the conduct in this particular chamber has been disgraceful, primarily from over there. It has been shameful. Slavia Ukraine.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Davor Ivo Stier.
Hvala predsjednice, kolegice i kolege. Ulazak sjever.
Thank you very much. The entrance of North Korea in the war of Russia against Ukraine is a very dangerous development. Russia has wanted it from the beginning. The narrative of Russia is that this is a global war against Russia. But what really needs to be a matter of our concern? Does anyone think that North Korea would join the war against Ukraine had China been really against it? Because China is the one who protects North Korea. And that is why today we should send a very clear message that defend the rights of Ukraine, that help Ukraine to fight Russian aggression. But we should also send a message to Peking. You should use your influence on North Korea and on Russia. You should use it in order to ask for good peace talks.
Thank you, President. In recent days, we've reiterated our unconditional support to Ukraine. against the criminal Russian aggression, which has always had the characteristic of a conflict that is not just regional. Here in this chamber, we have condemned the links between North Korea and Russia. We've been forceful in saying that the attack on Kyiv is an attack on Europe and its values. And the sending of North Korean troops to Russia, it constitutes escalation to a global level. And this should increase our intentions and attempts to work in a diplomatic style, but also to try and make sure we can close the economic corridors that are financing propaganda and disinformation in our countries, and make use of frozen assets immediately, those oligarchs, so that we can provide military support for Ukraine, which we have to do. Let us continue to act in this way, and I hope this chamber can function as a diplomatic attempt to do things rather than what is we see in old films, people talking around the table while the Nazis were preparing the invasion of the world.
Thank you, Madam President. As an MEP from the Alliance for the Union of Romanians and ECR, I think it is not good that the conflict is escalating. Russia is using ballistic missiles and soldiers from North Korea. Also, considering the geopolitical events in the US with the election of Trump, and given what's happened with the presidential election in Romania, there is a sense that we have remained stuck in some ideological narratives, like those soldiers that remain stuck in conflict long after the conflict has ended. We need to talk to the administration in Washington to draft a plan that leads to the ending of this bloody conflict. We need the treaty for offering security guarantees to Ukraine to contain a term for the entry into the EU of this country. We will remain a buffer zone, which is also valid for Moldova. Thank you.
Nicola Minchev.
Dear Madam President, dear Mr. Commissioner, honourable members, Ukraine has chosen the path of democracy, human rights and rule of law. But what it gets in response, it faces aggression from a regime that recognises only tyranny and violence. Russia must understand that its actions have consequences. Our unwavering support for Ukraine is not just a moral obligation, it's a clear statement that no dictatorship or invader will succeed in overturning the will of a free people. The growing military cooperation between Russia and North Korea presents a new threat to global stability. North Korea has deployed 11,000 troops to support Russia's war effort in Ukraine, but what it will get in return is even more alarming. The dark alliance of autocracies should compel us to act decisively. This crisis underscores the necessity for European strategic autonomy. We must be capable of defending ourselves through our own strength. By building a robust European defence infrastructure, we ensure that our Union can stand firm against any aggression, united, resilient and self-reliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Wouter Beke.
Voorzitter.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. 1,000 days, but in fact 4,000 days that Ukraine's been at war with Russia, and Russia's getting support. Support from China, support from North Korea, support from India, support from Iran, support from the Houthi rebels. I've just got back from the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, and there are experts there saying that Russia's getting more support than Ukraine is getting from the West. We're slapping ourselves on the back, given the amount of support we're providing, but Russia on the international stage is getting more support. That's the hard truth. And then we see interruptions of elections in Georgia, in Moldova, from Russia, and affecting Europe. Supporting Ukraine is supporting our Western democracy and our Western values vis-à-vis authoritarian dictatorships and regimes. I have one specific question. We need to give Ukraine the possibility to use long-range weapons to launch into Russia. And these launch platforms that are being attacked day by day, so give them that possibility, they can stop those attacks, Commissioner.
In 1 minute, please. We have a blue card from Mr. Grazoulis Petras, but I want to ask Mr. Grazoulis if he wants to take the blue card or the catch the eye, because both is not possible in this debate.
The blue card is okay.
The blue card? So you will not get the floor in the catch the eye? Okay.
I have understood, Mr. You are representing the EPP. You have the majority in the European Parliament. The President of the Commission also belongs to your party. She speaks, she says a lot of beautiful words, but they don't lead to action. Why don't you provide all the necessary armament to Ukraine? You simply talk. You shouldn't talk, but you have to do something.
Well, my appeal is not just to deliver weapons, but also use them in a more targeted fashion. Europe has said that it wants to provide weapons and wants to make long-range missiles available, but in a restricted manner. Make them more widely available, then these launch platforms, and Ukraine knows where these launch platforms are, then they can immediately be disabled and they won't be attacked every day by those rockets and missiles. That is my specific proposal.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Robert Biedron.
Sytuacja Ukrainy staje się coraz bardziej dramatyczna. Wydarzenia nie napawają optymizmem, ale to właśnie w takich momentach najważniejsza jest nasza solidarność. Niedawno Unia Europejska oraz kraje G7 postanowiły udzielić Ukrainie pożyczki w wysokości $50 miliardów, korzystając z dochodów z zamrożonych rosyjskich aktywów państwowych.
Sorry, there is no English interpretation. 1 second, please. Could you please check the English interpretation?
That's why we
Sorry, you can start then again.
You would understand me if you speak Polish. Okay, should I speak once again?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Sytuacja Ukrainy staje się coraz bardziej dramatyczna.
The situation in Ukraine is becoming worse day by day. The events on the battlefield and in nearby capitals are not reassuring, and this is when our solidarity is more important than ever. Recently, Europe and G7 countries decided to give Ukraine a loan of 50 billion euros from frozen Russian funds, Russian assets. That's important, but let's not forget that according to World Bank estimations, reconstruction of Ukraine will cost much more than 300 billion euros, and that amount goes up day by day. Putin and his allies must not remain unpunished. Russia must pay for all the damage. International law allows us to seize Russian assets that are in EU countries. Let's do that for Ukraine to free it and for Europe.
Rzecznik prasowy Pentagonu w zeszłym tygodniu.
Thank you. The spokesperson for the Pentagon last week said that there are 11,000 North Korean soldiers located in Russia, and also stated that African soldiers are also travelling to Russia. And this is stepping up, escalating the conflict. Now, We need more sanctions against Russia. Those who are supporting Russia's war and providing them with weapons as well. And we need to give a clear signal to Putin that the European Union will not give up on its support for Ukraine.
Madam President, Commission, colleagues, last week we marked day 1000 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Despite our common efforts, our military aid to Ukraine is far from sufficient, and it comes too late. And our economic pressure on Russia works, but is not enough. Putin seizes every sign of weakness from Europe as an invitation to escalate, and the Ukrainians pay for it with their lives. Let me be clear. It's time for us to speak the only language that Putin understands. It's time to step up and make use of our power as a union for defense. Ukraine has the right to defend itself, and we must stand with them for as long as it takes. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Lukas Furlas.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, the European Union has helped Ukraine in the war against Ukraine. This is the only acceptable answer that should be given to any invader. Invaders have to pay the cost for their actions, and this is a principle which is not only fair, but it is a question of safeguarding peace and international legality. If we also have the coalition between Russia and North Korea, and if Pyongyang is involved, the international community has to take action. The European Union must not accept this development that threatens the principles of international law. Our unity must be the strongest answer to the invaders, and that will be the greatest hope for peace. Thank you.
The next speaker is Christel Schaldemose.
Tak skal du have, fru formand. Ukraine har været...
Thank you very much, Chair. Ukraine has been at war for more than 1,000 days. The Ukrainians are fighting for their country and our values, freedom, democracy, and peace. EU was the staunch supporter of Ukraine and have been from the beginning, and we need to continue that. But I admit that I really am disappointed at the size of support, because there are many EU countries who don't support the Ukraine, and they don't give half as much as small EU countries do. Ukraine is fighting for our values, and physically they are the bulwark against Putin's ambitions in Europe. So we need to step up our actions. So the big countries also need to now start supporting Ukraine, so the country has a chance that will be decisive to ending this war.
The next speaker is Andrei Kolar.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I think we are very good in producing various resolutions and condemning everything that we can, but I remember or recall that there were times in the past, not too long ago, when these resolutions and proclamations of outrage and condemnation were somehow backed up by concrete, real action. What about now? As I said, we have numerous proclamations, we have various resolutions, we condemn, we are outraged, we stand by someone, we change pictures on our social networks, yet we let the aggressor to push us back. We see Russia siding with Iran, siding with North Korea, and all we do is produce another resolution condemning whatever they do. I think that we must stop schultzing, you know? We must find the lost courage and finally back up the resolutions by serious action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Marcos Rossempere.
Gracias, President. Thank you, President. Well, you can only imagine what over 1,000 days of war means without knowing whether a missile is going to hit your house, or tomorrow the invaders will come into your part of town. Over 1,000 days without knowing whether your child has a future. That's how things have been for over 1,000 days for Ukrainians with Putin's invasion. So we need to up our support to defend democratic values in the face of tyranny. Military support so that Ukraine can win this conflict, but also looking to its rebuilding. Frozen Russian assets need to be used so that the country can be stronger when it's reborn. Russian bombs threaten our democratic principles, but where Putin is destroying things, we need to protect and rebuild with our European values. Over 1,000 days of war, our support to Ukraine needs to be stronger than ever. Thank you.
Yes, the next speaker is Krzysztof Brejza.
Szanowni Państwo, dziś w obliczu brutalnych.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Now we support Ukraine. This is our democratic duty, and we need to ensure that we are able to combat the escalation from Russia. And a state is attacking Ukraine and our common values. Ukrainians want to support Western values, be part of the West. Therefore, our support is obligatory, especially when Putin is engaging in hybrid warfare against us. We should not bow to Putin. We need to see what has happened here, and we need to support Ukraine.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. This will be the third resolution on Ukraine in this legislature, and about the 20th since the invasion of Russia, Russia's carried out. We need to react to the provocations of Russia, and the arrival of North Korean troops is unacceptable. I'd like to recall that resolutions are important, but actions are even more important. Our resolutions often call on European governments to act. Sometimes they do it, sometimes it's late, sometimes they don't follow up properly. And the fundamental reason is that we haven't completed the European project yet, and the intergovernmental system is ill-adapted to the system requirements today: speed, resources and unity. With Putin on one side and Trump on the other, if we want to support Ukraine, we need to support it militarily and work for a just and lasting peace. We have to be equal to the challenges of our time. We need to have a genuine political policy and common European defence. Otherwise, our resolutions remain just words. We have a new commission, and we need to work with it.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Putin isn't just a dictator domestically. He's not only an aggressor to the outside world, he's also a dictator for those who carry on his message here in the European Parliament and in many other European parliaments, and in politics in member states and in Europe overall. And we need to stand for peace and so on and support that. If you look at what's going on in the US, in the old US administration, that was the truth, but that's not likely to carry on in the new US administration, because they're being propped up by North Korea, Tehran, and other opponents of our civilization. Because of all of this, the help from the West should carry on, and that is what I forecast now, peace and for the future.
Dear colleagues, the Russian brutal war of aggression against Ukraine has lasted for more than 1,000 days. It's the worst war in Europe since the Second World War. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom every day, for democracy and its existential right to... It's their fight, but it's also our fight, which is why we need to defend Ukraine as long as it takes to fight totalitarianism on one hand. We are the democracy. They have no laws. That's where we are. This is the defining moment for Europe and Europe's history. The autocrats seem to find one another. North Korea and Iran are supporting Russia. North Korea is even sending troops to Russia. What we need to learn is to stand together and, after the American elections, support Ukraine even more. Some European countries need to support more. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Very much. The next speaker is Sean Kelly.
Europe must remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine. If we allow Russia to succeed in this war, it would be a catastrophic precedent for our continent and the world. And with Donald Trump taking over in the United States, God only knows what will happen. We also face a growing challenge at home. On the far left and far right, we are seeing echoes of Russia's propaganda. This rhetoric seeks to undermine our unity and our commitment to Ukraine. For example, ahead of Ireland's general election this coming Friday, the left's Sinn Féin manifesto states, all sides must seize the current unlimited supply of weapons into Ukraine. I ask our Sinn Féin colleagues directly, what outcome do you want? Should Ukraine just surrender? Should they cede their territory to Russia? That is the only conclusion I can draw from such a statement. We must stand united for Ukraine and for Europe. Slava Ukraini on Ukran Abu.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Vytenis Bovilas Adriukaitis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear Commissioner, colleagues. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has turned, ironically, from a 3-day Putin's victory parade into a grueling war that has been going on for almost 3 years. I admire all brave Ukrainians who are not afraid of the rolling Putin monster. Putin Russia's constant request for help from almost all world rouge regimes, Iran and North Korea, first with ammunition and now with soldiers, only shows that Putin's regime is weak. It is holding a clay legs that can crack at any moment. I have a question to all Putinophiles, who are, unfortunately, still too many among Western politicians, but even more numerous among BRICS countries. Do you agree that in a modern world, one country can unilaterally redraw the borders by use of force? If you do agree with this, then a war will be on your shores, and we can bury a modern international legal system destroying cornerstones of peace and multilateralism. For me, the answer is clear. We have to stand with Ukrainian people and do much more, and united for Ukrainian victory is only one right answer and our slogan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ingeborg Terlag.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues. Oekraïne vecht al 1000.
Ukraine has been fighting for 1,000 days, not only for their freedom, but also for our freedom and our way of life. It is important that we support Ukraine in this fight and continue to support, both from Europe and from the individual member states. Peace and security are not self-evident anymore, unfortunately. And this is something that we can't accept here in Europe nor in the Netherlands. The deployment of North Korean troops in the Russian army has shown that Russia is not prepared to give in. To get Russia around the negotiating table, unfortunately, long-range missiles will be necessary. The war has to be ended fairly and properly. As Mr. Zelenskyy said in this parliament, this has to be the year of peace. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Maria Guzenina.
Thank you, dear Chair. We all know that supporting Ukraine is also about defending European values, principles, peace, security, democracy and rule of law. And we also know that eventually, if Europe is weakened, it affects the whole global balance. So my words go to across Atlantic, to Trump. If Trump wants to make good deals, he should see Europe as equals and partners. And Trump should treat Putin as he would treat someone attempting a hostile takeover, because that's what Putin is trying to do, attack our freedom and sovereignty. And in this House, we should be united. No one should for a second think that the future of Europe is secured with Putin's doctrine. North Korean soldiers brought to a European war is just one example that Putin's Russia will proceed. It will not stop if we are not going to stop him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ana Miguel Pedro.
1000 dias de resistência ucraniana são
1,000 days of Ukrainian resistance. This is a declaration to the world. You can't surrender freedom, but there's been a lot of sacrifice and courage. Children living surrounded by destruction, listening to sirens, 1,000 days of lives that have been torn apart, but people not giving in, defending their rights. For Europe, this is not a distant conflict. This is to do with fighting for European values, human dignity, the rule of law, freedom. If you think this is a distant war, it's already at our doors. History shows that autocrats step in when democracy yields. 1,000 days of resistance, fighting for freedom. Otherwise, it will be at our doors.
Austatud president, head ametikaaslased.
President, colleagues, Russia's full war has changed completely the geopolitical situation in Europe and the world. War is on Europe's doorstep. We must answer the question, what's the next step from Russia? It's not a question whether Russia is going to attack a new country. It's a question of when Russia is going to do that. Europe's answer must be that Russia will never do that or never be able to do it. Putin is escalating the war, and that means NATO needs to act 2 times quicker. We must cancel all visas of Russian citizens to Europe, establish sanctions. Belarusian, Korea, Iran are together with Russia. We must do something. We must extend our activities against Russia. We must abolish all restrictions. Tonight's attack on Ukraine, they need our help and membership in NATO and the EU.
Dale.
Tak for ordet.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I was born 15 years after World War II, though until 1,000 days ago, I could never have imagined that North Korean troops would be fighting in Europe against Europeans. but that's the reality in 2024. It should be clear to everyone that the Kremlin regime will not hesitate to use any means to crush Ukraine. If Russia wins, all of Europe will have a very unsecure future, which is why we need to ensure that Russia loses this war. I'm proud to come from one of the countries that have provided the most support to Ukraine, and now I encourage the rest of Europe to reach the Danish levels of support as quickly as possible. Ukraine needs weapons to beat Russia and North Korea, not resolutions and beautiful words. Thank you.
Next speaker is Krzysztof Hetman.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Komisarzu.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner. There's been a lot of talk of peace negotiations, even here today on several occasions we've heard that mentioned. But there isn't any of us who understand what the peace negotiations would look like. Ukraine would have to participate, and its point of departure would have to be a position of strength vis-à-vis Russia, otherwise it would be a catastrophe for Ukraine and the whole of Europe. Europe has to support Ukraine, therefore, and this support cannot be conditioned on the European calendar of elections. We need to work with Ukraine, and we must remember the genocide on Poles in 1943. So we respect what's happening, but we want to have respect for all of the victims.
Děkuji, paní předsedající, pane komisaři.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner, ladies.
Evropa selhává.
Let's be honest, Europe is failing. On the one hand, you have dictatorships, Putin's Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, Houthis, Yemen, dictatorships from Africa that are sending soldiers to the Russian front on Ukraine to kill Ukrainians. And toothless Europe is facing all of that. We are hemming and hawing. Should we send 1,000 or 100 grenades over? We're spending 2 years thinking whether we're going to make more or less. We're considering whether we should send more tanks or fewer tanks, send F-16s or not. And brave Ukrainians are dying in the meantime. We need to wake up. The European Commission needs to wake up and realize that if Ukraine fails, the European Union fails along with it. France, Germany, Spain, countries that don't want to give more money are going to end up paying 10 times more than they would pay otherwise. Thank you.
Next speaker is Radan Kanev.
Благодаря, госпожо председател. Колеги,
Thank you very much, αγαπητοί.
Парламент или вдясно, както в сегашния. Имаме свободата да променим стари политики и да приемем нови приоритети, често пъти едните и другите грешни. Имаме дори свободата във времена на криза и на комуникационна революция, бих казал, и хаос, в каквито живеем сега.
Sorry that I interrupt you. We have again no English interpretation. You have to start from new when the technical problem is solved. Is it okay now? You have to start, please.
Благодаря. Уважаеми колеги, имаме свобода.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have the freedom to go left or right. We have in this parliament, we also have a clear tend towards the right. We have the possibility to continue old policies or change priorities and change policies. Sometimes we get it wrong. We're now going through a period of crisis, and in communication revolution, we could put our trust in populists. We can put our trust in people who lead us down the wrong path. Our enemies see that as one of our weaknesses. In Tehran, in Russia, and in other countries around the world, they are trying to attack us there, but they are doing the wrong thing, because we have another freedom, the freedom to make mistakes. But nevertheless, we continue to stand for our values and can keep moving onwards.
Od ponad 1000 dni Putin zabija Ukrainę.
For the last 1000
Kiev wsie i miasta.
Putin has been
Ale jeżeli ktoś uważa,
but if someone thinks and hopes that Putin will stop in Ukraine, then they are mistaken, deeply mistaken. Putin is testing NATO. He's testing us, testing Europe. He's testing how far he can go. He's analyzing whether he can divide us. He's checking whether NATO and Europe will be ready to prevent the aggression by Putin. We have to show solidarity with Ukraine, and we have to mobilize any resources in order to support Ukrainians, because the people of Ukraine are fighting against Putin and thus defending us, defending Europe. Therefore, all the forces must be focused on helping Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ines Vaidere.
Colleagues, the Russian war in Ukraine is entering a decisive phase. Ukraine is bleeding, and what can we do to try and ensure that Ukraine can win this war? What we have to do is to bolster our defense sector, our readiness. We realize that many countries have not yet reached the 2% target. Rich countries like Belgium, Spain, or Italy have not reached the 2% target. Germany must send Taurus rockets to Ukraine. And they also need to allow Ukrainians to attack targets in Russia. We also need to work on Ukrainian air defenses. This also requires financing. Sanctions need to be tightened, including sanctions against the Russian shadow fleet that continue to deliver energy to Europe. And thirdly, there needs to be international pressure on those countries which stand on Russia's side. If we don't do all of this, it will be our soldiers, our sons and daughters, who will have to be fighting in the Ukrainian stead.
First on our list is Matej Tonin. He's not there? Or? Ah, over there. Okay.
Dear colleagues, today we're talking about a basic and fundamental question. In what world do we want to live? What will be Europe of future for us? Will this be Europe that will be based on the rule of law? Or will this be Europe or the world that will be based on the rule of power? And if our response is that we want to live in the world based on the rule of law, then we need to actually change our approach. And our only response is that it is our moral duty to support Ukraine as long as it takes. Of course, Russian propaganda is very effective also in EU member states. Support for Ukraine means continuation of war, but this is a lie. This is a blatant lie. As soon as a balance is struck on the fighting field, then we'll have a chance for a lasting peace.
Next speaker is Juan Fernando López Aguilar. Micro, please.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner Reynders, after 1,000 days of this unjustifiable war of aggression led by Putin against Ukraine, it's become increasingly clear that the military dimension of this conflict is it's not something which the European Union is well able to control. Putin is now threatening the nuclear option. He's also sending Korean and Yemeni troops. There are three things the European Union can do. First of all, we can maintain restrictive measures involving criminal law while using the funds confiscated from the interpreter picking up background noise from the speaker behind the speaker on the phone. It's important to point out that a whole series of countries, Poland and others, have been receiving funding for this. It's very important to maintain unity. This is the only way the European Union can remain relevant when it comes to finding a solution, in particular when Trump takes up occupancy in the White House.
Bert Frank Dröse.
Frau Präsidentin, der Ukraine.
Madam President, the war in Ukraine is lost. Anyone who says whatever it takes, as long as it takes or whatever, if you say the unshakable support, well, basically you're just continuing from what Joseph Goebbels said in his famous speech at the Sportpalast. Russia's destroying the infrastructure, but the NATO war of aggression on Serbia also destroyed infrastructure. The Serbian population is still waiting for the perpetrators to be punished. I could come to colleagues from the CDU from Germany. Gale is a terrible saber rattler. He says that the destroyed undersea cable is, well, he seems to be pleased, be celebrating the destruction of these cables. Anyone who votes for the CDU is voting for war in Europe. They're voting for death and destruction. Thank you.
I would like to point out that members of the House are expected to speak about other members with respect, and they should avoid insulting them. The next speaker is Daniel Salinos.
I have just returned from Ukraine. I have a strong impression from the front lines that despite of our statements of solidarity, Ukrainians increasingly doubt the reliability of Western and European commitments. Ukraine still struggles to secure even the basic weapons and ammunition it urgently needs. Meanwhile, Russia seems to be successful in implementing its strategy of war of exhaustion. With North Korean troops directly entering the aggressive war on the Russian side, we are now witnessing the emergence of new Axis powers in the 21st century: Russia, Belarus, North Korea, Iran and China. These tyrannical regimes view Ukraine as merely the first step in their broader goal to destabilize Western more democratic world and dismantle the rules-based international order. We must act actively. We must also have our strategy in countering the Axis powers. This means no more self-imposed trend lines, boosting our own defense capabilities and enforcing harsher sanctions on Russia and other Axis powers. Let us ensure that our support is worthy of Ukrainians' courage. Thank you.
Very much. The next speaker is Lukas Sieper.
Thank you, Ms. Vice President. Dear people of Europe, I wanted to hold a speech about the saying, show me your friends and I tell you who you are, but one colleague already did that, so I'm just going to say, if you use troops of a tyrant in your war, you are a tyrant. But one of my colleagues catched my eye, and this is Peter Bistron from the tyrant-supporting AfD. Peter Bistron, you need to know, right now faces criminal investigations in Germany because he was bribed by the Kremlin. And why do we know that he was bribed by the Kremlin? Because he was stupid enough to complain on telephone about the fact that they gave him 200 euro bills, which you cannot use in German gas stations. Of course, it's just an investigation. But as long as this investigation is pending, maybe Mr. Bistron should not have a big mouth about Russia in this parliament. Dear colleagues, we need to fight every tyrant, and we need to fight everyone that is on tyrants' payrolls. Slava Ukraina, thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Sieper. Ich möchte aber auch
Thank you, Mr. Sieper. Once again, I'd like to point out to you that you are not allowed to call colleagues stupid in this House. That's disrespectful. You should always show respect here. And I'm sure you could find other ways of saying what you wanted to say. The next speaker is Andrej Dostal.
Vážení, jaké reálné...
Ladies and gentlemen, what real solution do you have apart from the fight until the last Ukrainian? We saw over 3 years that sanctions have been failing us. Russia enjoys the support from Russia, BRICS and other nations in the world who have a bigger problem and issue with the West than with Putin. And also ignoring the genocide in Gaza is not helping us. There has been no coup d'etat in Russia and probably will never happen. It doesn't help to send money, and military intervention by the EU is not possible. We don't have an EU army, and the member states' armies would have to be approved by the national parliaments. I don't think there's a willingness to that. Even if there was a coalition of the willing, it cannot be directed from here, from the European Parliament. It does not have, never had, and never will have any power to decide over our participation in war on behalf of the member states. We do not have an interest in further escalation and becoming a battleground. The worst of the bad solutions for Ukraine, the best of the bad solutions is to negotiate peace for Ukraine. It's to be determined where the guarantees would come from.
Nesmierne rád, keď vás konečne uvidím, ako sami nastúpite na tú frontovú líniu, keď tak radi od rána do večera v tomto pléne.
Thank you very much. Well, we do need to act. But from dawn to dusk, you say we need to continue the war against the Russian Federation. We have to keep bombarding objectives in the Russian Federation and basically take us to the threshold of a third world war, a nuclear war. Well, who is the guilty party here? Where has our policy brought us so far? What did we do before 2014? There was an association agreement that many of you applauded, but this has taken Ukraine to a civil war that's cost tens of thousands of lives, and it also cost people's health, it will cost capital for Ukraine, and that's the situation we're in now, on the threshold of a third world war. Well, all we're saying in this plenary is just keep doing the same, keep sending arms, keep threatening Russia with bombs. Nobody says the word peace. It seems that you're all very simplistic because you don't think you're part of this war.
The next speaker, João Oliveira.
Madam President, this is a very serious and dangerous moment. The possibility of confrontation between nuclear powers is a real risk today. If you're aware of this risk, you can only be worried by the tenor of this debate and the proposals for motions for resolution. It seems that so lightly you're insisting upon escalating a conflict that's been going on for more than 10 years now, closing our eyes to the catastrophic consequences that this could lead us to. Where will this lead us? Where do you want to push our peoples, our children, our grandchildren, with this very dangerous support for militarism and war that we're hearing from around the room? Since 2014, we have been calling for the US, NATO and the EU should stop fanning the flames of this conflict. Since the very start, we have been calling for negotiation with all the parties involved, including the Russian Federation. We should find a political solution that guarantees peace and collective security and disarmament. What we need is to insist on building peace, and this we will continue to do.
The next speaker is Herr Braun.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. God bless everybody. Obviously, I'm against war escalation. I'm for the peace for all Europe, Ukraine, Russia, for everybody. But I can hear you warmongers here in this House mentioning values that you think Ukrainian regime represents. I can hear some of you saying that they are fighting for our values. So, well, that would be very bad for you, ladies and gentlemen, because the current Kiev regime is representing the tradition
of genocide, Nazi Ukrainian, Bandera genocide. Don't you see SS Galician emblems on the arms of Ukrainian soldiers? Don't you see their banners? Don't you hear what they say? Don't you hear yourself when you say Slava Ukraini?
To interrupt you now, the minute is over, and it's a question also of respect, please. Thank you very much, or not. And now we come to the last speaker. Is Mr. Grazoulis here? Because we had a little bit more time, so I can give him the floor. No, he's not here. Then we finish the Catch the Eye, and now we come to Mr. Didier Reynders for the Commission. Please, Commissioner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Minister, honourable members. This debate illustrates the need to continue the EU support to Ukraine. The European Union and its member states have done a lot, but the needs remain huge. Let me stress that this extraordinary assistance is an investment in the EU's future. Ukraine is to be able to successfully defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, also for our own security. The deployment of troops from North Korea to support Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a dangerous escalation of the war by Russia and has serious consequences for European and global peace and security. We strongly condemn it. In addition to transfers of arms and millions of artillery shells from North Korea to Russia, this is yet another blatant violation by Russia of international law, including the UN Charter, as well as of several UN Security Council resolutions adopted with Russia's support. It sends a clear message. Russia is not sincerely interested in a just, comprehensive and lasting peace, but is escalating and desperately seeking support for its war. You have rightly pointed out two issues requiring further work. We have indeed gradually moved from the one-off solutions at the outset of the invasion to more systemic assistance mechanisms. Our support to Ukraine will remain a crucial priority of the next Commission and High Representative designate Kalev. We will do more to put EU assistance on a more sustainable, predictable footing. This is essential to strengthen Ukraine now and for its recovery once the long-awaited peace is restored. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now the floor has the Council, Mr. Janusz Buka.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, the European Union continues to call on both Russia and the DPRK to immediately cease violation of UN Security Council resolutions and the UN Charter, and urges the DPRK to stop providing support to Russia's illegal war efforts. The European Union is closely coordinating with international partners on the matter, considering the serious consequences of this escalation for regional and global peace and security. The European Union will continue to do its part to uphold its international obligations and implement UN Security Council resolutions. We will continue to urge others to do the same. We are united in the condemnation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We are united in supporting Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. We will continue our work in support of Ukraine and its people, and this work must also include diplomatic action for a sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wir kommen nun zum Abschluss der Aussprache.
That brings us to the end of our debate. The debate is now closed. To wind up the debate, different political groups have tabled several different draft resolutions. We'll be voting on them on Thursday. We'll be suspending the sitting now for a few minutes. We will resume at 12 with the votes. Thank you.